they're still bagel. They're very good. They're just not, they're not exactly the same thing, but you'll see these are very easy to make, very tasty. I'm sure at the end of the night after you make them, you too will be converted to love Montreal bagels. Okay, so I saw somebody had a question. So just so you know, I have my phone set up here on a tripod, so I won't be able to see every question that comes by. So maybe Karen, you can help me out with the questions.
Yeah, I'll read them off to you. Okay.
Sure.
Just Louise wants to know if you're using active or instant yeast.
I use instant yeast, but we're going to activate the yeast in warm water. So if you have active dry yeast, you can use that as well. They're interchangeable for this recipe.
Okay, and Batya asks, what is high gluten flour?
Okay, so high gluten flour means that the flour has a higher protein content. So you can see at on the back of the package here, or I think it even says it at the front. It says protein content 12.7% here on the front of the bread flour package, which means that your bread will be chewier instead of more tender and cake-like. So you can imagine maybe two different types of challah that you'd eat, and one that is very chewy and kind of has strands that pull apart, and a challah that is very soft and kind of has a more cake-like texture. So the chewier challah was probably made with bread flour with a higher protein content, and the other challah is probably made with just regular all-purpose flour, which has a lower protein content. So for most breads, I use bread flour or high gluten flour. I think it yields a better texture, and especially for bagels, because texture for bagels, as we all know, is so important. Any other questions before we begin?
Nope.
No? Okay.
What about yeast? What's the difference between the yeasts?
Sure. So the difference between the yeast. So instant yeast, okay, so I have to remember this. I don't remember exactly, but I believe that instant yeast is like steamed and ground finer than active dry yeast, I believe. So, oh, my son, sorry. I guess he wasn't asleep. I'm gonna let my husband deal with that. So instant yeast does not need to be dissolved in water and sugar in order to use it in the recipe. Active dry yeast has larger granules, and it's suggested that you dissolve it in warm water with a little bit of sugar to activate it before you begin a recipe. I actually like to activate my instant yeast, even though you don't need to. In a recipe like this, where there's not a lot of sugar, you don't really need to. But for instance, when I make challah, and there's a lot of sugar and oil and eggs in the challah recipe, I do still like to activate my yeast to proof it with water and sugar, just to give it a head start so that the yeast has a little more time to get going before it's weighed down by all the other ingredients. But for a recipe like this, where it's pretty much flour, water, there's not a lot of oil, there's a little bit of oil and eggs, but you don't really have to do that. Are there any other questions? Okay, so let's begin. So like I said before, I tried to get all my tools and ingredients ready so that we can dive right in. I did actually forget to measure out my warm water, so I'm going to go to the sink. We're looking for 1.5 cups of warm water. So if you're baking along with us, you can go get that water now. I like to use very warm water at about 110 degrees. If I'm feeling very particular on any given day, I will actually measure the temperature of my water just to be exact, but you certainly don't have to. That is the best temperature for instant yeast. For active dry yeast, I can't remember what the exact temperature is, but 110 is actually quite warm. So here I have 1.5 cups of warm water, and I'm going to add in 1 teaspoon of sugar. And 5 teaspoons of yeast. So you can see that this recipe calls for quite a bit of yeast, but you'll see why when we start making it. There's not a lot of rest time or time for the bagels to rise. So I just sprinkled on the yeast, but I am going to give it a little stir so that all of it gets to touch the water. Not too much of a stir, just a little bit. There we go. And we're going to set that aside. So your yeast might look like mine. We're going to set that aside for a minute or two just to start getting bubbly. My yeast is very active. I buy it on Amazon. I use the SAF brand, SAF, and it always is very active and works very well. While we're doing that, we're going to measure out our dry ingredients. You'll notice that there is a slight error in the recipe, so my apologies. I didn't say pour the yeast mixture into the remaining ingredients, so I apologize for that. It's been a long 3 weeks of winter break with my kids. A little distracted when I emailed Karen, so my apologies. You can just maybe write it in. Okay, so we're gonna start measuring out our flour. We want 5 cups of flour. So here we go. And like I've mentioned in the past, we're going to try not to pack in the flour too much in our cups so that our bagels don't end up to be too dry and crumbly. We're going to keep our, that's why I actually often like to take the flour and pour it into something else, like a Ziploc bag or these big containers that I have for my other dry goods, because I find that it's easier to measure and not overpack when I'm not measuring out of like a flour bag. 4 and 5. Okay, and let's put in the salt. Where's my salt? Obviously, forgot it. Forgot it. So we're going to do 2.5 teaspoons of salt. 1, 2, 1.5. Questions?
Leah, is that kosher salt?
Excuse me. It's Himalayan pink salt.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, I'll show you what I use. I think I also buy it on Amazon. It's this big, it comes in this big 5-pound package. And I use it for all my cooking and everything. It's a great kind. I like it. It's a finer granule, so it dissolves really nicely in the bread recipes. Any other questions in the meantime? No? Okay, so you can see that our yeast is really bubbling up nicely here. So let's get the eggs here. I'm gonna mix the salt into the flour a little. Here we go. Just so that when the yeast hits it, it doesn't just hit the salt right away. And then we're gonna do the eggs. So we're gonna do 1 egg and 1 egg yolk. Here's my egg. And here is I'm gonna do my egg yolk. Okay. And we're gonna see an egg yolk, put it in my flour. And we're gonna do the oil, so 1/4 cup of oil. I use canola oil, but any neutral tasting oil will do. I would not use olive oil. That has too strong of a taste for our purposes here. Okay, so we got the oil, we have the eggs. salt. Let's do the honey next. It's nice to measure the oil in the measuring cup before you do the honey because then the honey slips out. So we're gonna do half a cup of honey. Okay. Actually a little too much. I put in a little extra by accident. So don't be like me, be a little more exacting. So Montreal bagels are a little sweeter, I think I mentioned already, than New York bagels, and part of that is because of the honey. So this recipe, if you joined me in our last class, I told this story, but I can just tell it again, that my mother worked at a cashier when she was younger, and she would talk with the patrons of the supermarket, and one of the patrons, I think, had a whole bunch of flour and yeast and stuff, and she was checking out, and my mother said, "Oh, what are you making?" And she said, "I'm making bagels. I'm making Montreal bagels." And my mother said, "Oh, how lovely. That's so nice. I've never made that before." And then the woman came back and returned and gave her a copy of the recipe. And this was, I think, I don't remember the year exactly. So Karen, I know you heard the story last time. Maybe you remember it was like in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
So I still have this like handwritten, my mother gave me a photocopy of this handwritten Montreal bagel recipe. It's really kind of neat. Okay, so my yeast now is looking very nice and fluffy, as I like to call it. And I have the salt, egg, oil, honey, and flour in here. And I'm gonna add in the yeast. And if you have a mixer, you can certainly do this in a mixer. Actually, I would recommend it because it's a lot easier to knead, just because it's a little bit more of a denser dough. I mean, you could definitely do it by hand too, but I don't know, maybe I'm just feeling a little lazy today. So you can see this, it's coming together. Let me just move this a little bit so you can. So you can see that the mixture is coming together and it's really clearing the sides of the bowl. And there's not a lot of raw flour remaining. And I'm just using a regular spatula. You could use a big spoon. And soon we're going to turn this out and start kneading it on the counter.
Leah, Mira asked if a hand mixer would work or only a stand mixer.
No, it has to be a stand mixer with a dough hook, because if you try to put this in a mixer with its regular beaters, you'll break the motor. So it's got to be something that can that has a dough hook. But you can see here that this is already like a nice cohesive dough. So that's kind of what yours should look like if you're baking along with me. There's not a lot of raw flour in the bottom of the bowl, just a little bit. It's all kind of come together in a ball. So now what we're going to do, make a little space over here. We're just going to turn the mixture out onto the counter. And if there's any flour here in the bottom of the bowl, we're going to take that out. I do have another dough scraper, but it might be in the dishwasher. I have like a white flexible scraper that I like to use to get dough out of bowls. It's a really fantastic tool. They're only a few bucks on Amazon. So if you like to bake bread, it's a great thing to have. Okay, so you can see that it's really a nice ball. It's not too sticky. I didn't put any additional flour on the counter. Isn't really necessary, but you might see that with your brand of flour or the way that you measure the flour, yours might be a little bit sticky or it might be a little bit dry. So you want to kind of get a sense of what the dough needs, then it might need a little touch of water or a little bit of flour. If you are going to add water, I would only add 1 teaspoon at a time. It's kind of hard to incorporate water into a dough. Okay, so here I'm just kneading. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing the dough out with the palms of my hand and bringing it back with my fingers towards me. And then I'm kind of giving it a quarter turn and then doing it again, out with my palms, back with my fingers, and then a little turn. And that's how I knead. So maybe I'll put down a little bit of flour on the counter because it's getting a little sticky, but you can see already how much the dough has changed in only a minute or two. You can see that it's already like it's a ball, it's elastic. We want this to be a very smooth and elastic ball. So part of baking bread, baking a lot of bread, baking sourdough bread and challah makes you a little more comfortable with stickier doughs. So they're not always as easy to knead, but don't be afraid of a little bit of stickiness. So who's baking along with me here? I have a bunch of people making bagels at the same time.
Yeah. Faye Levinson and Batya.
Awesome.
And Nancy Schwartz looks like she's doing it too.
That's great. Nice. Ooh, I'm just gonna take a little look. Are the Gromans on here with me? I know they mentioned they might be baking. Okay. So sometimes I like to give my dough a little break as I'm kneading it. Really what I'm giving is myself a break from all the kneading, but it's nice to let the dough rest for a minute, and when you come back to it, often it's easier to knead. This is another way that I knead sometimes when I'm feeling a little tired. I just slap the dough on the counter and roll it up. Slap it, give it kind of a stretch on the counter, and then roll it. Kind of a fun way to knead, a little bit easier. It actually does a pretty good job. I'm gonna put a little more flour on this. A tiny bit at a time, you can see. Just really like a light dusting. One of the things I love about baking bread is seeing how much the dough changes. From the beginning when it was very ragged and very rough, and now you can see how nice and how nice the ball of dough already looks. So the reason why I said that this recipe is a good candidate for a mixer is because it doesn't have a lot of rest time. You don't have a lot of time for the dough to rise. And I find, that often if the dough has a lot of time to rise, even if you don't knead it completely, it's the longer rise time helps to develop the gluten. But when you don't have a long rise time, you really need to develop the gluten with the kneading. Okay. We're just gonna keep on going, maybe for another minute. Really, you wanna do this for about 10 minutes, but I don't think I have 10 minutes in me. So, but if you do, yashar koach, keep on going. So I did not beat up the egg before I mixed it in with the flour. So on occasion, I'll see like a little yellow speck from the egg yolk in my dough. So I just kind of smush it away with my thumbs, mix it into the dough a little bit. It's not a big deal. Just make sure that everything is nice and distributed. Okay. So you can see how nice this dough is. It's not quite smooth, but I'm gonna give it a rest for a minute anyways.
Leah, Nancy asked if she can she just use the stand mixer, or does she have to knead by hand as well?
Oh no, definitely you can use the stand mixer for sure. You don't have to do any of this by hand if you don't want to. You can do
how long would you let it go in the mixer?
Honestly, I would still let it go for 8 to 10 minutes. I think you'll get really nice bagels if you do that. So we're not going to let this rise for as long as you would if you were making this by yourself at home, just for the sake of expediency. But if you wanted to, you could certainly follow the instructions exactly and let it rise for about 20 minutes now. But we're just gonna move on to the next step. Either way, we might have to wait a little bit for the water to boil. So I'm just gonna go wash my hands real quick. 1 second. Sorry. Any questions in the meantime on this or any other making yeasted? Oh, that was my Alexa. I wasn't talking to her. Okay, so the next step that we're going to do is I'm going to bring you over here. Oh, I'm going to cover the dough. Cover the dough so it doesn't dry out. You can put it back in the bowl and cover the bowl. I'm just going to leave it on the counter and cover it in plastic wrap. I saw somebody did somebody have a question?
Yes, can you put it in the refrigerator overnight, and can you divide the dough into pieces and freeze?
Okay, so freezing dough, I find degrades the yeast a little bit. So I prefer to bake the bread or make the bagels and then freeze. However, you can do it and likely you wouldn't notice a huge decrease in quality. However, my preference is to not freeze yeast dough. It's to freeze the final baked or cooked product. Was another question, can you refrigerate the dough overnight?
Refrigerate it overnight, yeah.
So I have not tried that with bagels. I'm sure you could. The only thing is that bagels are not like an airy and fluffy yeasted bread. You know, they're dense. They don't have a lot of, they're not like smushy and big and fluffy like challah is or brioche or anything like that. So when you do let it rise in the fridge overnight, you're going to get a lot of air built up in your dough, and the texture might change because this is bagels, it's not something else. If you wanted to do that, I know you're probably asking about now, and we already have the dough made. However, if you're making the recipe from scratch, I would use less yeast. So I would probably use about half the yeast if you're going to put it in the fridge overnight, maybe 2 to 3 teaspoons instead of 5 teaspoons, because the yeast is what makes it rise so quickly. And we use a lot of yeast to let it rise quickly. But if you're going to let it sit in the fridge overnight, I would definitely decrease the yeast. If you want to put it in the fridge now and you've already made the dough and it already has 5 teaspoons of yeast in it, go for it. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? You'll have like fluffy bagels. I mean, there are worse things, right? So if it's late and you're tired, do what you need to do.
Okay,
Is there
one
another
other
question?
Is it true for other bread doughs as well? If you use a dough hook, you don't need to knead it at all.
So I will answer that question, but before I do that, I'm going to bring you over here. You're going to travel with me a little bit. And oh, you can see my whole dining room that I converted into a play area. Hold on 1 second. I'm just moving you this way. Let's see if I can get the angle right. And this is a little bit awkward, but hopefully you can see. I'm just going to turn on the stove. I have a big pot here that I filled up with water. I'll try to move you when we actually make the bagel so you have a better view. But I'm going to turn this. I'm going to turn this up. Sorry, I'm grabbing the lid. I filled it up with water, turning it up high, and I have here 2 cookie trays, 2 clean cookie trays, and I'm going to show you what we're going to do with that. We're going to take. I have my. This is the only cornmeal I could get. It's called corn grits or polenta, but if you have cornmeal that's finer, you can use that too, but this works fine for our purposes. So I'm just going to take one of the sheet pans and kind of dust it with cornmeal. We're just preparing to make the bagels. So while we're waiting, now I'll answer your question just because I wanted to get that pot going. So I'm going to move you guys back. I'm sorry you're traveling with me. Close your eyes if you get dizzy. So about the dough hook, yes, that's true. The question was, was that you can use a dough hook instead of hand kneading for any bread recipe? Is that right, Karen?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely you can use the dough hook instead of hand kneading for any bread recipe. Some people claim that there's a difference in texture. Some people prefer hand mixing over a dough hook. I mean, I'm all for being practical, you know, like not everybody has 10 minutes to sit and kind of work with the dough, and a dough hook is certainly more convenient. So somebody asked a question about the cornmeal.
Can you show them the amount of cornmeal on the pans?
Sure. So it's kind of like a dusting. Basically what you're doing is like cornmeal acts like little conveyor belts. They're non-stick. It makes when you put your bagels on the pan, they won't actually stick to the pan. They'll stick to the cornmeal, and the cornmeal sticks to the pan. So first, it works by helping your bagels not stick to the pan, and then also think about pizza. Like a lot of times when people make pizza and they use a pizza peel to put the pizza in the oven, sometimes they put cornmeal on the bottom because it helps it slide on and off. So, I mean, it's not like we're sliding our bagels anywhere, but I think in this situation, it's mostly used to help it not stick to the pan. Okay, so I put the water on. I'm going to now measure 1/3 cup of honey for the water as well. So I'm going to take that extra honey from before, and we're going to measure out 1/3 cup. So some people use in their their boiling water for bagels, they use like malt syrup. But honey is a little bit more accessible. But I think malt syrup is what's more traditionally used because it helps the bagels brown and give it a nice flavor. Karen, when you made your bagels, what did you use for your water?
I use barley malt syrup.
Yeah.
In the bagels also, yeah.
Yeah. So, but it's a little harder to find. I mean, now you can find anything, right? But where
Amazon.
did Amazon, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna give my dough a little turn because I didn't knead it for 10 minutes. So I'm just gonna give it a little extra kneading now after it rested. But you can see how different the dough is after resting for a few minutes. It's more pliable, it's smoother. So I'm just gonna give it a few kneads here and then cover it up again, and I'll put that honey in the water.
Judith asked, what's the purpose of the honey in the water?
It helps give the bagels some flavor, and it helps give it texture so that when it goes in the oven, it'll brown and caramelize kind of on the outside of the bagel. So like, you know, picture a bagel, the outside isn't pale and doughy. The outside is kind of chewy and a little hard. Part of that is from the boiling, is just from being boiled at all. But I think part of that is also from the honey. So you can see now that like the dough is kind of stiff. It's pretty smooth. It's in a nice ball. It's kind of keeping its shape too, which is nice. So we're just going to cover that right back up. And I'm going to put the honey.
They asked how much barley syrup you would use.
I would just say I think I would use, if I was using barley syrup in this recipe, I think I would probably do an equal amount, but I would probably want to do just a little research before to look at comparable recipes that use barley syrup, because I'm not as familiar with barley syrup.
Yeah, I used 2 tablespoons, but it's a totally different bagel recipe. It wasn't Montreal bagels.
Right. So I don't know. I don't know that I would necessarily just replace the honey in this with barley syrup. I think I would try to find a recipe that used barley syrup instead. But you can always try. Let us know how it comes out.
Any preference in lining the cookie sheets with parchment paper versus baking directly on the baking pans before pouring the coating of cornmeal?
You can put parchment before you put the cornmeal. However, in my experience with making these bagels, because you're boiling them in the water, when they come out, there's going to be like water attached to it, and it makes the parchment paper soggy and slippery, and sometimes gets all crinkly, and then it doesn't work as well. I've tried it because I thought I was going to be like, oh, why do I need cornmeal? I could just use parchment paper, but it doesn't work as well. Cornmeal is really a better alternative. But if you don't have it, then by all means use parchment paper. Like, you know, like with everything, you can always try, but my preference is just to do the cornmeal like this. Okay, so we're gonna get actually the other tray prepared as well. So this was just one tray, but we wanna have 2 trays prepared. So one of them is gonna be for the bagels. A little much. The shaped bagels, and the other one will be for the bagels as they come out of the boiling water. And then really, I don't know how many baking trays you have, but if you have more baking trays and you feel like doing more dishes, which we all feel like doing all the time, then really, if you want to prepare a 3rd baking tray with parchment paper, then I would recommend that, because it just makes it easy, because then you have one where you do the raw bagels that aren't baked, another one where you put them right after they come out of the boiling water, and then you can coat them in sesame seeds or whatever seeds you like, and then put them on a 3rd baking tray to bake. So that's my recommendation. So we're gonna get the sesame seeds prepared. So one of the hallmarks of Montreal bagels is that they are heavily seeded. None of that light New York bagel sesame seed topping that people prefer. These are like really heavily sesame seeded, and it's always sesame seeds. However, if you'd like, you can certainly use other toppings. Everything bagel is very popular. Poppy seed, garlic, choose your own adventure. Okay, so I'm just gonna put some of this stuff in the sink just to give us a little more space here. So what I did with the sesame seeds, as you can see, is I took a lot of them because, like I said, this recipe we're looking for a heavily seeded bagel. So I have a big package of sesame seeds and I poured them on a plate. Be forewarned, you will have sesame seeds all over your floor. It's just a part of making these bagels, but nothing that a good broom won't fix, right? So
Do you put the honey in the water?
So I haven't yet, but I'm going to do that now. So here's my honey. I'm just going to go put it in the water right now. So my water is still working on coming to a boil. I don't know about you, but here we go. Just putting that in. Just give me a minute. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna actually, I'm gonna get my third baking pan ready and I'm gonna put my tools next to the boiling water. So I have, if you have one of those like spider skimmer type spoons, now would be the time to use it. I don't have one of those. I know they're really handy for doing things like deep frying. Probably would have been great for my last class with the donuts. However, I don't have one. So I'm going to use a combination, high-tech combination of tongs and large spoon. And maybe I'll even get a big fork in the mix. So we're going to get these tools and just, I'm going to put them down next to the pot. So we're all ready. My water is coming to a boil. So we're going to start forming the bagels in a minute. I'm just going to grab my last tray. And while you're at it, this is a good, so I have my baking sheet and I have tray. In my experience, this makes at least 2 trays worth of bagels. Makes a lot of bagels. I like to freeze the bagels after I make them, and my kids love them. They're great. I'm also going to take this opportunity while we're waiting for the water to boil to preheat the oven to 450. So I'm going to do that now. Okay. So I think we're ready to shape the bagels. I'm just going to give my counter a little wipe. It's got some honey on it. Okay, are there any other questions before we begin kind of the next step, next stage? No questions.
Yeah. No, I want to know if this is what you're talking about, Spatcha.
Oh, okay, let me just scroll through. Just give me a second. Okay, so that's more like a spaghetti spoon,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm talking more about like, it's kind of like has a flat bottom, and it's kind of like a mesh strainer. In fact, a large mesh strainer might work well for this purpose also.
Leah, this is here. I have a spider right here.
Oh, there you go. So if everybody could take a peek at Karen, Skokie Valley.
Yeah, here I am. See, this is a spider.
Yeah.
It's like a strainer on a long handle.
Right. So you might find that actually using a large a large mesh strainer might work for you as well. Okay, so give me 1 second. I think my water is starting to come to a boil. I think somebody asked what temperature to put the oven at, 450. So I'm just gonna go quickly give a peek at the water and see if it's boiling. No, but it's getting there. I have it on high. Okay, so we're gonna start dividing up, sorry. We're gonna start dividing up the dough now into 18 pieces. So I'm actually gonna keep this here. So I wanna cover my dough at all times so that it doesn't dry out. But you can see like how nice and smooth and kind of supple the dough is. So we're gonna divide it in half. I use this, it's a bench scraper, stainless steel bench scraper. We're gonna divide it into half and then half again, so quarters. So we're basically just dividing into 18 pieces, right? Let's see. So about 5 pieces each, right? Okay, it doesn't have to be like perfect and even shape, but if you can get them to be like kind of the same size, it's nice. You don't have to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're gonna, I'm just gonna grab more plastic wrap so that we can kind of make sure that the dough doesn't dry out as we're working. Okay, we're going to roll. So you want a large snake about 8 to 10 inches long. My dough is kind of giving me a little resistance. I don't know if you can see. Can you see that it's kind of bouncing back? So the trick when that happens is to just let it rest for a minute as you're shaping. And then that gives the gluten a chance to relax. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to form my bagels. But here you can see I made a little bagel shape. So I'm going to show you how I did that again. Okay, so we want a long snake. You guys are going to get very good at this because you have a lot of chance to practice with 18 bagels. And I'm just going to bring it around and kind of pinch the edges together. So it helps that my dough is not too stiff. It's a little sticky still. So that kind of helps the ends adhere to each other. It's not too sticky. It's still easy to work with. But you can see a nice bagel. And then you just set it on your cornmeal lined pan. So you can see like this is going to be, if you're really particular, you can weigh out your pieces so that you don't end up like me with like some monster sized bagels and some petite bagels. Like that's a huge bagel. But as I like to say, we'll eat it anyways. Okay, so we're going to continue doing this. Sometimes I like to roll the ends together a little bit just to make them a little more uniform. But it's a fairly straightforward process, and we're going to also cover those, make sure that we cover those as we go. So in the recipe, it says that we're going to let these bagels rest for about 15 minutes before we boil them. I'm just going to roll these all up and then start from the first ones and boil them. Even when I don't teach bagel classes, I do that just because I figure that the first ones have the time to rise by the time I'm ready to boil. And I'm a little impatient. So any questions about this, the shaping, the forming, any of that kind of stuff? The only thing I can say is that they can be a little bit thinner because they will rise quite a bit in the when you boil them and when you bake them. So I wouldn't worry too much if you think that they're kind of skinny or kind of thin. So Batya said it's really hard to put together. I see. Is that because your dough is kind of stiff? Why is that? Batya, do you want to unmute yourself and just tell me what's going on with your bagels? Let's see if we can troubleshoot.
It's just hard to make the ends stick. I guess it's stuck.
Okay, so that could be for a few reasons. It could be that your dough is a little bit drier, in which case you could try like putting a little bit of water on the ends to help, excuse me, to help it stick. That might not work. I mean, another thing you could do is just let your dough rest a little bit. And it's possible that it's just the dough is a little too stiff. So you can try to cover it and let it rest for about 5 minutes and then try to come back to it and make the bagels. And that might help too. Or make all of your snakes and then come back to them and start forming them again. That would also work. That way you don't have to stop completely. You can kind of keep on working as you go.
You're making me into a baker. I never baked.
That's awesome. Like that a lot. Okay, so you can see like I'm already going on my second tray. So if you plan better than I do, you could probably fit these all on one tray. However, I put them all helter-skelter on the pan, so I don't have room to fit all of them on. I'm just gonna, that's okay, we'll figure it out as we go. So it's best if you try to make your snakes kind of even width throughout, like not tapered on the ends, because then you can see mine, like sometimes I'm more successful at that than others. And also like I don't devote too much time to each bagel, but if you wanted to really perfect them, you don't want them to be so thick on one side and thin on the other. It's better if if the snakes are more even, and then they don't get, you don't have like a thin spot on your bagel. Okay, I'm just gonna take a quick break and go check on my water to see if it's boiling. Not even boiling yet, almost. So we're gonna continue forming these bagels while we wait for that water.
Leah, have you ever done it with making them into balls and then just sticking your thumb in the middle to make the hole?
No, but let's try, why not? Maybe that'll be better. Here we go. Here's a ball. Here's a ball. We're gonna name this the Karen method. Okay, and then I stuck my finger in and let's go. So one of the things about Montreal bagels is that they're like kind of thin. So I wonder if we can stretch these out enough to be, because we don't want them to be like no hole, you know? Like right. The no hole is like a New York bagel where it's like kind of thick and then there's really no hole, but we want there to be a nice size hole. So we can try to do this. This is definitely makes like more of an even bagel. So definitely I would encourage you to try the Karen method and see which way you like more. I think, Karen, I'm gonna stick to my tried and true for the moment, but did you like that other method? I think it makes more of a consistent bagel, whereas the way that I do it might be a little quicker, but less consistent, which is kind of the story of my life.
Well, your way is more traditional.
Okay, how are we at time? 8:20. 50 minutes. We're at 50 minutes of bagel making. but we're getting there. You can see they're starting to look like bagels. Okay, as soon as my water boils, I'm going to show you what this looks like in the water. And it's good to have all your equipment set up before you start with the boiling, because it goes very quickly. And I like to have the bagels made, the pans ready. I find that makes the whole boiling baking process go fairly quickly. And of course, your oven preheated. Okay, we're on our last section of dough. All my bagel makers, how are you holding up? Hopefully well. You could see this last section I divided into 4 because I'm starting to feel tired of making bagels. But they're going to be pretty big. This is going to be like a big bagel. That's okay. That'll be my bagel. I want to get boiling already. I'm starting to get impatient with my bagel making. Karen, when you were making your bagels, how long did it take you? Was it also like a big project?
Forever. Mine had to rise in the refrigerator overnight, so it was like a 2-day ordeal.
An ordeal. Yeah, that's correct. Oh my gosh. Okay, here we go. Almost done. Okay, I can start to actually smell the honey, which means that I bet my water is starting to boil. So like I mentioned before, if you were not baking this along with me and you had a little bit more time, then at this point, you would let your bagels rise for about 15 minutes. And we're gonna see if the water is boiling. I'm gonna wash my hands real quick and set up over here. Hold on. Give me 1 second to adjust my tripod. If you wouldn't mind, everybody. Because I want you to really be able to see here what's going on. It's kind of difficult because we're blocked by this annoying cabinet. Okay, is that a good angle? Can you kind of see what my pot over there?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yes.
Okay, great. More light. I'm just gonna wash my hands real quick and then we'll see if the water is indeed boiling. And we can kind of get going on these bagels. Sorry. Okay, I think it's boiling. Ta-da! Okay, we are ready. So let me grab my trays. I'm gonna start with the first tray. It's nice to have a large working area next to the bagels. So I put my tray of bagels right here. I know you can't really see, but it's kind of next to the boiling water. And I have my sesame seeds right here, my tools, and I'm also gonna get my tray that's gonna go in the oven. Okay, kind of running out of room here, but you can, I'm just gonna put my tray behind the camera so you can't really see it, but we're gonna start. Okay, so we're gonna do, if you have a very wide pot, you might be able to do more than 3 at a time, but we're gonna do just 3 at a time. What we're gonna do is we're gonna put the bagels in, flip them over immediately, and then let them boil for about 1 minute. We're gonna take it out, dip it on the seeds. I'm actually also gonna take out a clean dish towel, just in case the bagels are too hot to handle. I'm gonna put a dish towel over here so I can put the bagels on the towel if they're too hot, and then dip it in the seeds. And then I have my tray lined with parchment right here behind the camera, ready to go in the oven. So we're going to begin. Okay, so you're gonna see 1 bagel, right in, 2, right in, 3. Try not to let them deform when you put them in. And then we're gonna flip them over with my fork. You can see, flip, flip. And this last one, flip. And we're gonna let that boil for about a minute. Actually, do you have a good shot, a good angle of the bagels? Can you see?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay. I'm gonna turn them a little. I really should use a oven mitts, as it wouldn't do to light my kitchen on fire while I'm in the middle of teaching a cooking class. Okay. So you can actually see that the cornmeal side of the bagels is facing up. So we're letting that go for about 1 minute. And then I'm going to attempt to remove them with the spoon and tongs. Okay. Woo. So I'm just going to put that straight on the dish towel. 1, 2, 3. And I'm actually going to get my next 3 bagels in right away. 1, 2, 3. See, I'm just stretching this one out a little before it goes in because it kind of got a little bit like smushed. And then flip, flip, and flip. This one I'm gonna flip. Okay, and then that's gonna do for a minute. And then these have cooled off a teensy bit, and I'm just gonna dunk them in the sesame seeds. So you can see that that's like a lot of sesame seeds. Can you see? I don't know if with the light, if you can really tell. So I'm gonna take the bagel and kind of put it straight onto the plate. So really dunk it up in the sesame seeds. And then that's gonna go straight onto my baking sheet over here. So you wanna be gentle with them. See, if you're not too gentle, then they really come apart on the end. So I try to be a little more gentle than me. Like I said, there are already sesame seeds everywhere. Here, but you can see here, like the bagels look really nice, and they're actually gonna puff up a little bit more to get in the oven. Okay, and I'm actually gonna try this time to use a large strainer to take them out. I think that'll be a little bit more successful than my tongs, because like I said, a spider is really the best thing to use, but this will have to do. So 1, 2, 3, and then we're just going to do the same thing as before. Put these in, flip them over. I'm going to put 4 in now. And then just let them boil for a minute. Does anybody have any questions? And you can kind of turn your temperature back up if it loses its boil. So feel free to play with the temperature of the water. We're just gonna, if anybody had, I think I already asked, but if you have any questions, let me know. So you can feel when you take them out of the water that they're kind of puffy, but they're still very delicate.
You dip it only one side into the seeds, right?
Yes, just one side.
Can you tell them the steps after the water again?
Yes, so so once I put them in the water, I flip them over and let them boil for a minute. Once they're done boiling for a minute, I remove them from the water, and you can put them directly on a cornmeal lined sheet, or you can put them on a clean dish towel. So here, now that my cornmeal lined sheet is actually free, I'll put them back on that. And then once they're cooled up, or you could put it directly into the seeds. I just don't have enough, they're too hot for me to dip straight into the seeds. So I'm just putting them straight onto the cornmeal lined sheet pan that I was using before, now that it's empty. And once it cools off a little bit, I'll dunk them straight into the seeds. So you can see here, I have my tray, my nice tray full of bagels. They look good. My oven is at 450 degrees. And so I'm actually going to put the first tray of 6. If you wanted, and you have, I mean, I might as well add, actually, maybe I'll make this 8 because I have a little space here. And then I'm just gonna put that right into the oven. So these ones that I have over here, I'm gonna put in the sesame seeds. Now that they've cooled off a little bit, they're easier to handle. And the fact that they're a little bit wet from the water from boiling makes the sesame seeds really stick. And now I'm going to take this pan and I'm going to stick it right into the oven. And I'm actually going to turn the oven down to 400 so that they don't burn. Okay, okay. We are ready to go with our second pan. And then basically you're gonna bake them for 20 minutes and then that's it. And you've got, you've bagels. So that's really the whole process. We have a second tray, which we can work on together here. It doesn't take too long. But that's really the whole process of bagel making from start to finish. So you can see it's not kind of like a pachka. There's lots of steps to it, but it's not too difficult. It's not technically too difficult. It just requires a little bit of coordination at the end with the boil and the dip and the seeds and all that. Was there another question?
Do you take the internal temperature after baking?
I do not. I don't. You'll be able to tell once they're like nice and golden brown, and they're not so thick that I find that I don't really need to do the internal temperature, because it's not like a big bread where you don't really know if it's baked through, because they're so thin and because they have a hole in the middle, which is, you know, one of the reasons why it has the hole in the middle, I think, is so that it bakes quickly. So I don't find the need to take the internal temperature. Good job, everybody, on your bagel making. How are our bagel makers doing? Faye and Batya, and I think there might have been somebody else.
The dough is too sticky to begin with, but.
Oh, okay. So you can add a little bit of flour if it's too difficult.
I did, but it was still kind of sticky.
Is maybe a little more flour. I mean, the sticky dough is nice because then the ends of your bagels will like hold, and they won't fall apart.
Mine are
But it
falling
does.
apart.
Yeah, it's kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. If it's too stiff, the ends of the bagel won't adhere to each other, and if it's too sticky, it makes it kind of difficult to deal with. But one thing about sticky dough is that you might want to try the Karen method of forming them, of just making a ball and then making a hole in the middle with your finger, and that might be an easier way to form if they're very sticky.
What is the story with the temperature in the oven? I've heard you said 450, 400.
Yeah, so I preheat it to 450 to get the oven very hot. And then when I put the bagels in, I turn the temperature down a little bit because they do burn. They bake fairly quickly and they do burn if you keep the temperature up the entire time. The original recipe actually says bake at 450. And if the oven is too hot, turn it down. But I've made this recipe quite a few times, and I always find that the bagels start to burn after a few minutes because the oven is very hot. And because there is honey in the recipe, the honey makes it caramelize, makes the sugar caramelize. So it does, they are prone to burning if you're not careful. So I just always turn it down right away. Okay. Those are just cooling off. I'm going to put them in the seeds in a moment. So I'm just going to shake my plate of seeds kind of so that I don't, so that they're even. So I'm getting a bagel-sized hole in the middle of my seeds.
How long do you bake them for?
About 20 minutes. But you want them to look like a bagel, like kind of golden brown.
Leah, you don't bake them on the cornmeal, right?
No, I don't. I bake them on parchment paper. Although you could bake it on the cornmeal, would be fine. Nothing would happen if you did that. Cool. So I don't know about you, I've got sesame seeds everywhere.
Leah, there was a gentleman on named Robert Klein. He says, thanks for the lesson, very fun. I'm a caregiver to a 98-year-old who's calling
Wow.
from the other room, letting me know it's time for me to sign off. Thanks again.
Thank you. I think I have to get one of those spiders, Karen. I think you're right.
You know what, Leah, they're $1 at the dollar store.
I love that dollar store. That's a hot tip. You heard it here first, everybody. They're $1 at the dollar store. Okay, here we go. My last bagel going in. I'm gonna burn my hands a little bit, but I think it's worth it. I think also I'm running out of space on this tray. So if you like other kinds of seasonings, definitely you could use them instead of the sesame seeds. But I would sprinkle them on. Like if I was using everything spice, I would not do what I'm doing because I think the taste would be too overwhelming. I would just put the bagels that are not topped on a baking sheet and then sprinkle the everything bagel spice on top of that. On top of the bagels. Okay, Okay, I'm just making room on my baking tray for 2 more bagels. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do it. See? One and 2, and then I'm going to show you the tray. So you can see that I had like a huge tray of sesame seeds, a huge plate of sesame seeds to start out with. And I think I used almost all of them here. I'm going to show you the tray. We can turn this off. We're done with that. So I'm going to get this in the oven. And that's it. You want to bake them, like I said, until they're nice and golden brown. Hopefully your kitchen is starting to smell delicious, like my kitchen. And that's all we got for today. So hold on, I'm just straightening this out. I'm so glad that you joined me tonight. Does anybody have any questions before we say goodnight?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Do you
You're
put the
welcome.
cornmeal on both sides? Because it seems like a lot of cornmeal.
Yeah, it's a bunch of cornmeal. I mean, no, what I do is I put cornmeal on the baking sheet like this.
Yeah.
And then this is where I rest the bagels before they're boiled. And then I boil them and I put them back either on the cornmeal sheet or on a clean dish towel. And then I dunk them in the seeds and then I put them on a parchment lined sheet tray and that goes in the oven. Any other questions? As always, you know where to find me. If you have questions, I'm on the Skokie Valley WhatsApp groups. You can email me if you, if you have any kind of questions about this or anything else. And it was a pleasure baking with you this evening. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much.
Thank
You're
you.
Thanks,
welcome.
Leah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night.